foundation which works in the cultural sector. Hello and good morning. So I'm going to be talking about a partnership that the foundation has with the Louvre Museum, which for access to the cultural section. So you're probably wondering why we've got the Mona Lisa and a bus up here, but there are two words, culture and exclusion. Now, you've got a rough idea. When you're excluded, it means you can't manage to belong to a community and a social entity for complex multiple reasons, as you've just heard, difficulties to have access to housing and meet one's everyday needs. And this means that people are excluded. So culture, how does one define this? It's a little bit more complicated. It's a whole heritage. It's a mindset, and this means that one can belong to a social group. And if we talk about exclusion and culture, one has the feeling that it's obvious, but once you try to qualify it and to understand it, how a lack of culture or a difference in cultural levels can be a factor in exclusion, and how to resolve this situation, it becomes much more complex. So in France, we often respond with laws. As it happens, there is a law, the law number 98, which fight against exclusion. So let's have a look at Article 140. Equal access for all during life to culture, for sport and holidays is a national objective. Why a national objective? Because it guarantees that people become involved citizens. So there we have the first link between culture and society. And it is because you have access to this heritage and this culture, which makes us become members of an entity. And that means we are in possession of our own citizenship. And so for this to become possible, there have to be places which are offered to be able to share this heritage. So our symbolic place, of course, is the Louvre. It is not just because it's the largest museum in the world, it's also because it has this characteristic, which is it is both a cultural place and a historical place of interest. So from many points of view, one can say that it is an excellent test to see how this culture can be shared, which cements a social entity. Is it a museum for all? Well, yes. Well, it's an immense museum, 64,000 square meters, 460,000 different rooms, 38,000 works of art, 9.3 million visitors a year. So, okay, seems to be that there's place for everybody, space for everybody. And it would seem to be able to be an effective way of sharing culture. So let's see how such a tool, fantastic tool, can be a lever as an access to culture. So there is a response to this, the idea of free access to museums. We're all familiar with this. It's not an old idea. It's come from England, where how could one develop throughout the diversity of different social levels within the public and from different social sectors, how can we get everybody to be involved? It's very clear. So what people stops them from enjoying culture is that it's too expensive. Let's be simple. Let's make it free. So we've adopted this idea in France to the Louvre, free entry for certain people at a certain social level. So we have a place, it's very symbolic. So fantastic cultural offer. So availability of entering free if certain criteria are met. So here we have an important vehicle for sharing culture. Except, who are the visitors? Let's have a look. 7 out of 10 are tourists. So when I've said we're also responsible for this, the RATP, it's probably because of this. So I'm not necessarily going to come back to this right now. But, okay, so 7 out of 10 are tourists. Let's just think about it. When did you go last go to the Louvre? Okay, I'm not going to ask you because it could be an embarrassing response. So what does this mean? It means that you're not going every week. Why is this? Because we're all convinced that the Louvre is there for us, and we think, well, we can go anytime it's present. We can go a little bit later. We'll go when the kids are older. But in reality, the access to this museum is not necessarily the price one pays to go. It's the fact that you could say to yourself, I can go whenever I want, and I know what's within the Louvre. So we can see, let's have a look at these figures. What does this mean for different social levels? Do different social levels say, I can go whenever I want? There's an interesting study that was conducted in 2013 by Auxilia to understand how underprivileged people had access to the museum. And I think if you can see this, the greatest factor is 56.5 visitors, 56.5% of visits were sacrificed. So, for example, if I don't have much money, I'm going to spend it on going to work, and maybe spend it on going to see the doctor or picking up my children. In fact, something has to be sacrificed. It is going to be the superfluous visit to a museum, which doesn't necessarily bring me extra money in, and this is a cultural outing, so I'm going to forego it. This may seem obvious. Access to culture is, for people who are in a precarious situation, something is deemed non-necessary because the benefit is not obvious and cannot be recognized, and seems entirely normal to not go and benefit from it, because in terms of priorities, it's not a priority. So if we go back to the Article 140 of the law, access to culture basically means people become involved citizens. So in fact, there's a sort of vicious circle starting here. Because I'm a single mother with some children, because I don't earn much money, and I've got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I've got to go to work and look after my children, because maybe I need to spend a lot of time traveling, getting to my place of work, I can't or I won't go and have a cultural outing with my family. Then I am not sharing this heritage, and I'm not sharing this shared value. So I'm not part of this collective citizenship, and I don't even realize that this is what I am condemning by not doing it, not benefiting from this cultural outing. So the problem is not just money, not just about money, because we've seen that access to museums can be free for these people. It's also the idea that it is normal to not go on a cultural outing because it's not a priority. So if we really want to act in this domain, we have to act not just in a financial manner and talk about money, because as we've said, we've said that the Louvre is affordable and free for some people who can benefit from free access. We have to stop them from being inhibited from going to the Louvre. So there are two types of problems. First of all, the Louvre might be a long way away for some people if you don't live within Paris. And the idea of going to a museum like this means that one has to think about using public transport, and maybe even buying a ticket on the metro or on the bus can be difficult if you don't speak French very well. Try and think about somebody who can't speak French properly. Now, the second series of difficulties can be that just imagine that one does go to the Louvre. Is it going to be enjoyable? Do I feel I'm in my rightful place? Would it feel odd that I'm there? So some people don't want to do this. Transport, and also what is going to happen when I actually do go and visit the Louvre. So the Foundation and the Louvre have developed a partnership together to say that we, as people who transport people, we're going to simplify the transport of visitors. So we want to be able to prevent people from feeling frightened and not feel frightened about reading a metro map, and also allay their fears about going into the Louvre? What happens if I don't understand the Louvre? And we're going to help by providing trained speakers who can accompany people during the visits and explain to them with a simple language by welcoming them and helping understand their questions. For example, I want to see that picture of the lady with her baby in the Louvre. There are several. Now, if the speaker smiles, then the person who's asked the question is going to feel humiliated. But if the speaker says, I know what you mean, I know a very, very beautiful one, let's go and have a look at it, and I'll explain who's painted it and what it represents, then the person who's asked the question will feel a lot easier. So we want to be able to encourage everybody who wants to have a cultural outing and understand their different levels of understanding about culture and share this shared heritage. So we have a few solutions here to offer. And this is what I want to show you. So let's come to some numbers. So what Mona Lisa and the bus is access to culture. So it's not an obvious thing. You would have thought that it would all be financial, but in fact it's not financial. It's actually much more complicated than that. It's psychological. It's a fear of access to culture and going on a cultural outing. And it's much more difficult because it's very difficult to get over these fears. You have to want to help this particular type of person understand and make them feel safer about going out and the problems of getting on the bus and help them with volunteers and foundations who can help them and welcome them in the right way when they come to the Louvre with a speaker who can accompany them and guarantee that there is a special visit for them and that suits their needs. So since 2010, we've been able to welcome over 7,000 people from within the Paris Basin and from other areas of France. And one of the conditions of this foundation, of RATP Foundation, is that we work with associations who have managed to welcome people who don't have much money. So we are dealing with a flagship museum that is renowned throughout the world, enabling people to have access to culture. But this is not sufficient unless we can work on those obstacles that prevent people from going on a cultural outing. So sure, we have the law in the Article 140. So we have to go and find these people. And if we don't go out to reach out to these people, we'll never be able to achieve our objectives. Thank you very much for listening to me.